Hey everybody, it's Mr. XStitch here and welcome back to another Designer Discourse video. It is my pleasure to have you here. And for the final discourse of this first season, I interview Johann Verbruggen, the founder of the Flanders Tapestry Collection. Johann's a great guy. He's a fourth generation textile business person. I guess that's the best way to put it, but be sure to listen to the first part of the video where you'll understand what I mean by that and how long his family have been involved in the world of needlework. It's great, and it leads to an interesting discussion about lace as well, which isn't necessarily what you'd expect from a conversation with a tapestry designer, but hey, it was worth a go. We have a great conversation about his creative processes. We talk about the difference between tapestry and cross stitch and just explore, his industry, his perspective on things. Johann's a lovely guy. He's clearly living his best life. So I think you'll really enjoy the video. So grab yourself a cuppa, make yourself at home, and we'll see you on the other side. There's a long backstory for you, isn't there?
There is actually. Well, it actually goes back to, it's going to take me a little while to explain it, but it goes back to the late 19th century when my great-grandfather, he set up a company, and he was a lace maker. So they had a lace making manufacturing business. I don't know if you know anything about it, but in the sort of north part of Belgium, in Flanders, every sort of reputable city has its own type of lace.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most famous ones is the one in Bruges, the bobbin lace. But the lace that my great-grandparents and my grandparents produced was lace made on silk tulle, and it's very fine embroidery. It's actually incredibly intricate. Very few people still know how to do it. So they started that, and my grandparents, my grandmother, it's my grandmother's side, they took over the business when her parents died. And so in the 1940s, after the war, and in the 1950s, they really made it into an incredibly successful business. I come from a very small town in the north of Belgium, close to Antwerp. They have about 30,000 people living there, but they employed about 300 people, which for that type of town is quite a big employer. And what happened then is that because the Japanese manufacturing of lace became very popular, they kind of my grandparents had to divert, and they had to diversify their business because it was all done by machine.
Right.
And of course, the price of machine embroidery against hand embroidery is much more commercial. So they then went into sort of haberdashery, and they went into fabrics, and they did, for example, they got commissions from the army to do the really sort of elaborate, what you call them, those shoulder pads with tassels, and they produced all of that kind of stuff. And when I sort of grew up in the 70s and 80s, I spent a lot of time with my family, with my grandparents, and their workshop was at the back of the house, so it was fantastic for us to go and play there as kids. So we were surrounded by embroidery, beading, beaded handbags, and all those kind of accessories, and that was all being made there. So that kind of was sort of second nature to me. And then when I went to the UK, I moved to the UK when I was 20 and started working for Liberty. For some reason, and I don't know why, I ended up in the haberdashery department, and I ran haberdashery in the fabric department there.
It's fate.
Through no choice of my own. It just happened. It literally happened, and I found myself incredibly at home. Nothing was alien to me because I'd seen it as a child. And that's when I started doing some dressmaking, because I thought, I have to understand the product and so on and so on. And I started doing some needlepoint, and what really stuck with me was tapestry, because that's something that I absolutely loved, and I started doing it then. Buying kits, just making them up, and about 8 years ago we moved to France, and that's when I thought, actually, I'm gonna see if I can design something myself. and I did, and I just started. I bought a bit of software on computer so I could register all the stitches and the color codes and so on and so on. And yeah, I kind of never looked back from there, to be honest. I just really enjoy it, and it runs, yeah, you know, obviously runs in the family, and it's something that I've been enjoying for the last 20 odd years.
Yeah, I love that. I love the history of it as well, because it's quite curious. Like I really love lace, and I have had a little tiny go at it myself in the past. It's like localized throwing, because if you're good at lace, you know how to like flick a bobbin 1/4 of an inch with your fingers and stuff like that. And where I grew up in Bedfordshire, it was one of the first parts of the UK that actually the Belgian traditional lace ended up. And there's some connection to like Catherine of Aragon as well, who was a big fan of it. And I think that it was just weird to realize that like literally the place where I went to middle school, because we have like lower, middle and upper schools, the place where I went there was one of the first places in the UK that got lace, because there was a sort of industrial heritage there, and lots of Flemish workers came over and they bought the lace with them. And that's kind of how it landed and became part of a thing. And I was just like, oh, it's weird to be so close tradition. But that like geographical specific nature of it is something that's quite rare in, you know, you get it in some other forms of perhaps embroidery and stuff, but lace, it was like you had certain tales for certain areas and you'd get songs that went along with them and stuff. I mean, the Belgian tradition is like strong, right?
Yeah, very strong. You touched on Catherine of Aragon, and the reason why she was such a fan is that her sister, Joanna of Castile, got married to Philip the Beautiful, I think it was, and they got married in my hometown.
Oh wow!
In Leer. So that's where the horse of connection started, because her sister obviously loved the lace and so on and so on, must have sent some stuff to Catherine of Aragon, and that's how it kind of became popular in the UK as well.
Also, Philip the Beautiful. That's a name,
Philip the
isn't it?
Beautiful, I think he was called.
You know, you've got like the Philip so the Bold or whatever, but this guy, he's the beautiful.
No.
That's quite good. And then obviously, yeah, like you say, then with your family history, mechanization comes along, and you know that pretty much, or you know, the Industrial Revolution was great in so many ways, but not for kind of the handmade textiles and stuff like that. So
absolutely not.
Must have been, I guess obviously this precedes you, but it must have been a really curious time for the business to have gone from being, like you say, such an important aspect of the town, because presumably all of those people were like hand workers that were working producing that.
Yes,
right?
I mean, what I mean, the way it worked is that they would. I mean, one of the rooms at the back of my grandparents' house was for apprentices. So they hired, or they employed apprentices, obviously at the minimum wage, as it happened in those days, because they were learning a skill as well. But you know, they would be taught how to do it. There was a lot of people like farmers' wives who would do it at home. All you needed was a frame, so they could earn a little bit of extra cash by, you know, doing that particular, or making that particular lace. And all of that disappeared. You know, when Japan started with machine embroidery, that particular demand for handmade lace completely disappeared, and obviously it affected so many people. The only people who carried on with it were people who had the money to spend it on handmade, you know, who could afford handmade lace. I know they got a few. They made a few. They had a few commissions from churches and for altarpieces and that kind of thing. So that was still being bought, but you know, the main industry, the bottom fell out of it, because you know, the machine embroidery was up and coming, and that was sort of late 40s, early 50s.
I used to live
century.
in a town called Wolverton as well. This was like a decade ago, and that was a train making town. And at one point, certainly around the turn of the century, similar sort of thing, you know, like 2/3 of the people living in the town were employed at the works, and they would go through like 7-year apprenticeships to get their skills up and all of those sorts of things. And then again, the tide turns, people start making trains in different countries and all those sorts of things. And the thing that struck me, because I got quite involved in the town, I was on like the town council and stuff like that, but it's almost like there was this poignancy where there was this entire generation of like highly skilled craftspeople who were just like left hanging. almost like there was no way for them to continue with that skill set anymore, and unfortunately nobody else to pick up the skills further on because the demand for work wasn't there and stuff. And it was just and such high level like craft making as well. It's almost like you just wouldn't get that standard of work these days at all.
No, absolutely. And the luck for my grandparents was that my grandmother was a real businesswoman, and so she found a niche, or she found a way of getting onto the fashion market and doing beaded handbags, and that provided employment again. But they made things that ended up on the catwalk in New York, and I've got pictures of that, of models showing the handbags off, and the collars, of the fake fur collars that they made, and so on and so on. But a few of the big businesses in my hometown went bust because they didn't diversify. They didn't go down a different road because they were either too proud or they didn't quite know how to. But yes, it affected so many levels of society.
And is it the same as it kind of is over here now, that lace is very much just a thing for kind of tourists? That's the only time that you see any like I say, I was in Bedfordshire and I sort of went along to a lace group to kind of spend a bit of time with them because I was like, it was really interesting, and I managed to get one of the people there to do a column on the Mr. XStitch site called Adventures in Time and Lace, where we looked at like modern takes on the tradition. But you still find that because of the length of time it takes to make it, unless there's very specific bespoke requests for someone who wants a little something for their wedding, most of the time these people are making lace for their own pleasure or to go into like the local tourist information as just an example of a bit of like history or something. Do you feel that's the same over there?
I think it's the same, and it depends on what type of lace it is. I think the bobbin lace from Bruges, for example, that's a lot quicker to make and isn't as I'm not saying it isn't as skilled, but it doesn't take as long to learn as the lace that came from my hometown. So you have that, there is still that commercial aspect for tourism in Bruges, so that still does very well. And like you said, apart from that, you have the specialized institutions like the Royal School of Needlework. They will do intricate lace making, very similar to what my grandparents did. Very similar techniques as well, and that is for the big commissions like wedding dresses for the royal family, or so that tradition still carries on, and that's a good thing because it means that the skill doesn't go missing, it doesn't get lost in history. It's still people who know how to do it, but yeah, apart from that, there's very little demand for it now.
I remember a long time ago I did a post maybe like 9 years ago or something, and just sort of found out it was about Lefkara lace, which is like Cypriot lace, and that's actually protected by UNESCO because of its like cultural significance and stuff like that. And it is just a funny one because, like I said, cross stitch is done everywhere, tapestry, so many needleworks are done everywhere, but it's rare to get that textile format that is just like, no, this is from this part of the land and not from any other part of the land and stuff like that. And yeah, you kind of hope that, almost a bit like other indigenous narratives and ways of being, that maybe it is kind of held on even by a desperate few, even if it's sort of, and it's an aesthetic thing, isn't it? The length of time it takes just doesn't sit well with like the commercial viability of mass production.
No, it doesn't, but I think there is still that pleasure of being able to do it for those who still can do it, and I think it's an amazing achievement. And it for me, that's one of the things that we'll come on to, I'm sure, but it doesn't matter how long it takes. It's the journey, just enjoying that particular craft. And I think it's the same with that lace now. There are sort of a few hobby groups in my hometown that kind of carry on the tradition, but they do it purely out of their interest and also the joy they get out of it. And the therapeutic side of really concentrating on what you are doing and forgetting all the worries in the world.
Yeah. Now I realize that, we're meant to be talking about, and I couldn't just let that pass though, because I find lace really interesting, and so that I knew.
Sorry, mate, you're scratching again.
Am I still doing it again?
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. It's just for the recording. It might interfere with
it. I'll just apologise to the audience in advance. It's fine. So So yeah, so you're brought up around all this stuff, and then yeah, it's interesting. Then, so what was the job? When did you start in Liberty? What was the plan there?
I actually started in menswear. At the time, they still had a side on Regent Street, and that was the men's department. And I started in the tie hall. They had a separate. I mean, we're talking '93 now, so nearly 30 years ago. And they had a massive offer of Liberty ties there, and that's where I started. I barely spoke any English. I went over to the UK just for 5 days on a kind of a midweek holiday, and walked into the store, loved it, absolutely loved it. Walked up to the personnel department and saw if they had any vacancies, and they gave me an interview there and then, which was amazing, and gave me a job there and then, which was even better. So I was 20. I went back home for 2 weeks to pack things up, and I started working there.
You must have done well.
Sorry?
Like you must have done well at interview. If you say you barely spoke much English and stuff like that, you must have done a blinder.
Well, I think I wasn't the only one. I think they kind of could see that, it wouldn't take me long. One of the things that the guy who interviewed me said was, you need to start watching EastEnders, because you'll pick up the Cockney accent, and you'll be able to understand. And I got hooked on it for 20 years.
Okay.
So, so that was that. And then there was an opportunity for a promotion, which happened to be in Harrods, and I always wanted to be in Harrods. That was a Liberty concession in Harrods, and it happened to be haberdashery and fabrics. I just went for the job because it was promotion in Harrods, and the fact that it was fabrics and haberdashery hadn't played a part in it. So it kind of happened, really.
Not a man for a job in a normal supermarket, Johan. It's just like, I'll start with Liberty and then I'll just move to Harrods, and then thanks very much. That's
It was good fun. It was really good fun.
Mm.
And in those days, I mean, it was a different time. I remember going to Harrods, and you had to go for store approval. And at the time, you can't tell now, but I had a bob, and they said they signed it off, and they said, yes, you can start, but you have to have your hair cut. You try and do that now.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And I did, and it was, yeah.
So then it was sort of a bit of a chance encounter with Needlepoint, and you kind of falling for it and deciding that was your thing.
Kind of. I never sort of thought when. It's a really bizarre thing to say. I never thought that I'd kind of make a living out of it.
Mm.
At the time, it was just being in a department that happened to sell fabrics, needlepoint, and all the accessories, and making the most of it. And so, because I wanted to know the product and wanted to know how to use it, because we had to sell it, and I wanted to understand it. I just tried a few things out, and absolutely fell in love with tapestry, and carried on with it.
Can you remember the first one you kind of did? Do you still have it?
Yes, I haven't got it anymore because the moths got to it. It was about 20 years ago. It was a Beverly needlepoint. It was actually a trammed canvas. And it was lemons and limes, I think.
Okay.
Something like that. So it was a half cross stitch type with I think it was anchor wool or something like that. So yeah, that was the first one I tried, and I loved it.
And then how long did it take you to sort of decide you wanted to make your own? Was it like, so say for me, right, I started doing cross stitch, and after a while I was sort of struggling to find the stuff that was me, that kind of reflected me, which then made me find the software so that I could at least do stuff that fitted in with what I was all about or whatever. Is that similar for you?
Exactly the same.
Right.
Exactly the same, especially in tapestry. At the time, the tapestries that were available were fairly old-fashioned, fairly traditional, didn't really go with any of the interiors. So I found myself just making things for the sake of making them and not really using them afterwards. And I then worked, when I started working for the Royal Collection, I kept on doing the tapestries, but I started to think actually maybe there is something in it to go for something that's not necessarily modern, but that is a bit more in keeping with the interiors that I like.
Mm.
And that's how it started. Once I left that job and moved to France, I kind of looked at some designs online because I wanted to buy another project. Couldn't find anything that I thought actually that suits, our house here. And I thought I'll give it a go. I'll see what happens. I'll just order some wool, order a frame, and I'll see what happens.
Mm. Did
And
you
it did
do?
work.
Did you ever dabble with cross stitch?
Yes, I have actually. I have, yeah. I've got a few items in my range that are cross stitch. Yeah, but I'm more about I prefer the wool. I prefer working on the frame, and I prefer the feel of wool and the stitch and the result that it has.
Mm.
For some reason, for me personally, it's a more textured. I
Yeah.
don't know if that makes sense. It
No,
just appeals more.
I tell you what, someone described a while ago, and I can't remember where I heard it, but you can often get a sense of the value of something by the weight of something.
Mm.
So if you're holding cutlery and it's heavier, for instance, it feels like it's got greater value. And the thing with like tapestry is it's just heavier because the materials are heavier, the canvas is heavier, and so you do end up with more of a physical connection to the work. It's also in a way like more laborious, isn't it? Because a lot of the time you've really got to like work with the wool to get it through the holes and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's part of the you end up with a sort of stronger physical connection.
I think that's part of it, but I think the other side is one of the things I really like about cross stitch is that you can take it with you. With tapestry, it's a lot more difficult because you need your frame, you need your, cross stitch you can do on the train if you wanted to, if it's not too big, and that is something that I really like about cross stitch. And I do some cross stitch once in a while, because I do enjoy it. It's a nice change as well. Nice change to feel different of. A different type of textile.
But with the needlepoint, it's just a larger scale, isn't it? I've got a friend and his grandma owns a small stately home in Sussex. Not a big stately home. It's only got like 7 bedrooms, something or other. But she's been a needlepointer her whole life. And she's like needle pointed rugs. There's this one massive rug in their dining room, and around the border of it, it says like this was created between these dates, but it also says if this rug is not in, name of building, it has been stolen. And she's like stitched that all the way into the rug and stuff. But
that's brilliant.
You can sort of see there are photos of her with just like a ream of like fabric on the top of her because she's working on this one small section and stuff. And I think that's always been a fascinating thing about needlepoint, isn't it? Is it's scalable, and it's always been like cross stitch. I find sometimes struggles to know what to do with itself. Like you can put it in a hoop, you can put it in a frame. It's quite hard to gauge what other things you can do. I mean, there are other things, but with needlepoint, it's always been that kind of interior decor thing, like from the get-go almost, isn't it? It's always cushions or chair covers and antimacassars.
I think with cross stitch though, you have that as well, because especially on the continent, an awful lot of people do tablecloths, with the cross stitch pattern. And one of, when you say about size, my aunt made a tablecloth for my mum once, and I think it was 7 meters long for the table. We had one table that extended, and I've got a picture of it. I'll send it to you because it is unbelievable. It is. I mean, it took her over 2 years to do it, but it's got this big banner in the middle with all sorts of different types of herbs.
Right.
And it is stunning, but it's about 7 meters long. How she did it, I don't know. Because that's one hell of a weight of fabric to work with.
Yeah.
And but that's very much like your friend's rug.
So then it's quite hard. Like what I like about your designs, the ones that I am aware of, is they're quite classical, but you still got quite a modern approach to them. I think the choices of colors and stuff they're akin to like the horticultural, botanical imagery, the kind of stuff that you would see in the books that they don't really do that much these days because everyone can take really good photos. But I mean, what would you say your aesthetic was?
I think I do like the sort of classic designs, but I always like to either, like you say, do a little twist with the background color maybe, or give them a slightly sort of more, I don't want to say, a slightly less traditional look than what you would expect.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've achieved that with some of the designs. I'm starting to work more on cream now, because I find the customers respond really well to the cream background. But then I will do something with the colors on the actual design that is a little bit different. I'm not sure if you've seen the Thistle. I've got a Scottish Thistle,
Right.
and that is, I did it on pink, which sold well, and then I did it on cream as well, which is one of my best sellers now.
Okay.
But I changed some of the colors on the inside of the Thistle, so it popped a little bit more. And it's really finding that balance between something that hasn't got that old-fashioned look or traditional look, but doesn't go away too much, because if you go too outlandish, it won't necessarily fit with an awful lot of interiors. You're very much putting yourself in a niche market then. And I think it's finding that balance of being a little bit, maybe sort of a traditional design with a slightly fresher look.
Yeah, because
I
it's
don't know
almost
if I can design that, if I can describe it correctly like that, but
yeah. No, I
that's
know
what
what
I'm
you
aiming
mean.
for.
There's another designer, Anne's Orchard, who does like sort of cross stitch and needlepoint designs, and hers again. There's a sort of, it's like modern nostalgia. It's like there's a nostalgic element to it. There's a recognition of what has gone before, but there's still a freshness to it, and that's different to people who repeat the same old, whereas that's just like a sort of nostalgic rehash or something. I think it takes a certain amount of astuteness to carve that line.
Yeah.
And get on the right side of it.
Yeah.
Was that aesthetic, like the natural stuff? Was that the thing that you were always? Is that what you started doing, or has it evolved over time?
I think that's how, because I couldn't find anything like that online. I really wanted something that had that feel, that had that sort of traditional feel with a slightly more modern approach to it. And I couldn't really find anything within the sort of the tapestry range. You can find that in cross stitch. You can find really, I don't know, really almost over the top designs in cross stitch. The tapestry, it's much more difficult. You either go from very traditional or you go to completely bonkers.
Yeah,
if that's the right word.
Mm.
But there's very little in the middle. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about.
Okay.
This is one of the cushions that's one of my favorites. It's just a cabbage.
Yeah.
But it's on a pink background, so it kind of it makes the whole thing pop a bit more.
Yeah.
I'm going to do it on cream as well because it could work, but it's also the way the shading works inside and the way it kind of, it almost pops out a bit of the cushion of the background. That's what I like about it. There's a bit of movement in there.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, like, if you get the background and the foreground colors in the right like discord, then the foreground pops out, but also it's quite pleasing because you've got that quite sort of, and it's still somewhat that pink's quite a sort of neutrally sort of tone, isn't it? So it's not going to offend, it's not going to stand out in a room, but it does do the thing of like bigging up the cabbage, which is a phrase I never thought I'd say particularly. I really like is it the black rose? That's quite a recent design.
This one, yeah.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the same thing. You know, there's a little bit of movement in there. It's not like your typical rose that you will find on very traditional. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but on your Elizabeth Bradley's, for example, that's a really traditional Victorian-looking design. This goes away from that a bit more, and also I think the contrast with the background works really well.
Do you think that by choosing that kind of content, as opposed to, like, say, Emily Peacock's got quite designy designs, if that's it's a weird way of putting it, but you know, she's got a strong visual aesthetic. Hannah Bass, who's a friend of mine, she does lots of maps and those sorts of things. Again, they're quite sort of high contrast.
Those designs. Yeah,
they're quite sort of outliers, though, aren't they? And do you think that like yours is a bit of a middle ground between, like, if you like, the broader needlepoint audience, who I can't escape the feeling they still have that traditional aesthetic, that's still what they go for, and yours is like a stepping stone away from that, without them having to take the risks of perhaps going something too far?
I think what I was aiming for is to get those real traditional taste that people have, to push it along a little bit and maybe sort of to go for something that is not as Victorian looking. And also I think it gives the the whole image of tapestry as such, it gives it a little twist, because it doesn't have to be very traditional or old-fashioned, or it can be slightly more exciting. Not that the old-fashioned or the traditional ones are not exciting, but it can appeal to a younger public as well.
I wonder whether the old, like a lot of the traditional designs might be quite pleasant to stitch. You know, sometimes I think when people are making cross-stitch designs, you have to think about what a pleasure it's going to be for someone to stitch it. So I guess in some ways, like, your designs run a risk because someone's got to stitch an awful lot of the same color in a background.
Yeah.
And that can be a make or break kind of thing, can it? But for a lot of designers, you just got to think about little pockets of interest to make sure that the stitcher is happy and they get those little victories as they're going along on the bigger piece. So I wonder whether some of those more traditional things, it's like jigsaws as well, you know, jigsaws still need a good shot in the arm as far as I'm concerned. But you look at a lot of the traditional looking jigsaws and you think, well, at least they're quite interesting to like find the pieces and stuff. There's plenty of interest. I don't know, what's your take on the needlepoint market? Because it is a different beast to the cross-stitch market.
I think that especially the tapestry market, I think it went through a severe dip about 15 years ago. And it has really kind of, especially now with COVID, it has really picked up. It's got a real revival. I'm not saying that it's revived as much as knitting has, because knitting is, you know, the last 15 years has really gone berserk. But I think it also it ticks that box of doing something, making something yourself, and having, like I said before, that's a very therapeutic feeling with that. You know, this is a few years ago, somebody bought me a color by number, and I thought, what a waste. Because it is the same thing. It is actually the same thing. You know, you're doing something, you're really concentrating on it. But I think people are starting to realize if they do concentrate and do some stitching, they actually have something to show for it at the end that they can still enjoy, that they can pass on as an heirloom. There is much more value to it, whether it is a jumper or a cushion or cross stitch. I think the whole needlepoint market is really sort of feeling a revival because of that, because people want to be a little bit more individual. They don't want to buy things from IKEA all the time. They want something, they want a few pieces in their home that are really theirs. And I think that realization has really affected our market.
What would you say your audience, like demographically and even kind of globally, where are they at?
Well, unfortunately, it's still very female led. And I find that a real shame. I have a few sort of returning customers, especially from the States, that are guys that are really enjoying it. But there is still that stigma, I think. And you must, I mean, this is two guys talking about needlepoint, for God's sake. You know, this is quite unusual. But there is still that stigma. And I kind of regret that, because I think there's something that I would like to change. And I would like to change the way it is perceived sometimes. But I would say I sell worldwide, a lot to the States, a lot to the UK, obviously, but also to Australia, Canada, not so much Europe. I think Europe is much more cross-stitch orientated. Cross-stitch is very big there, except for France, where tapestry is still very popular. But yeah, mainly female. I would say the majority of my customers are 50 plus.
Right.
But more and more younger people are kind of seem to be picking it up, especially now with the whole COVID thing. I've noticed that a younger public is now buying it.
Do you think price point has much to do with it? Because I've often like observed that you could do a cross stitch design and you could turn it into a needlepoint pattern. It's essentially the same thing, but because of materials and stuff like that, you can usually charge about 4 times as much for a needlepoint as you can for a cross stitch.
Yeah, but it costs about 4 times as much as well.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying it's not, a valid reason. No, I think that's part of the barrier to entry, perhaps.
I think that's why it's so difficult to break into new demographics, because it is mainly people who know what they're getting for their money, who know the technical side of it, because there is still a huge amount of difference in the quality of some of the needlepoint kits out there, or the tapestry kits. I make sure that my kits are all printed and that they are digitally printed, so the registration of the stitches is absolutely spot on. I've got that. There's only one printer left in the UK that does it to a T. I also use the best, as far as I'm concerned, the best crewel wool on the market, which is Appleton's. So that pushes up the price. I think what people need, and I have noticed that on my YouTube channel, I've only got 2 videos at the moment. There's a 3rd one coming out.
Link in the description. I just did that. That's what you do. You go, it'll be there. I'll put a card in or something.
There are two tutorials on there, and one of them has hit something like 12,000 views in the last couple of years. And it's you know, people are interested because we are a niche market. You know, we are not mass market at all. Cross stitch or ourselves, it's not mass market, it is niche, and I'm very happy with that. So there seems to be a much bigger interest developing again.
It's fascinating to be involved in such a global pastime. I'm always like, I'm never not struck by that, if that's a weird use of a double negative, but like I realized it a long time ago, you know, that it's in a way quite an honor to be part of something that people do in all corners of the world and people have done for centuries, and it's got such a strong connection to so many different people. I think there are lots of other industries you could be involved in that are much more lightweight, even if they seem more like relevant these days. I don't know, mobile phones or whatever, you know, but it's not like people go, my great granddad used to have a mobile phone. I mean, maybe they will, but it's quite an honor, and I never get tired of discovering little pockets of people who, you know, or cultures that have got a needlework tradition that you weren't aware of beforehand. Do you feel the weight of responsibility at all?
No, I just try to enjoy it. I think my main thing is to, when I'm designing, that I enjoy it. I forget about everything, and I can just you know, I can be miles away and just stitching away and forget about time, forget about everything, and it is the most amazing feeling. I love it. Do I feel the responsibility? I feel responsibility about, you know, creating products that give the industry a good reputation.
There you go.
I think that's a big responsibility. You don't want to be seen as somebody who rips people off by not offering you know, what they are paying for, basically. And I think, you know, the majority of reactions I've had on my product have been fantastic, and that's a wonderful thing to hear. Once in a while I've had 2 bad reviews on Etsy, which I was gutted about, because, you know, I try to bend over backwards, but some people are just, you can't please them. But there is that pride in your product, you know, you work on it. I'd work on, for example, that cabbage cushion that takes about 3 to 4 months to make. To design. So you work on it for a long time, and you put an awful lot of pride in it. I don't feel the responsibility. I think I feel the pride in what I'm doing.
How much do you let those negative reviews burn into your mind, or are you able to cut them off? It
takes a few days to get out of my system, and I have to ask my husband to take the computer away, because I'm about to respond something that, you know, is, you know, shouldn't be read and shouldn't be put on their sites, because, you know, you just part and parcel. I mean, I've had 2 bad reviews basically that weren't a 5-star. One was 3, one was a 1, because she hadn't received it yet because of COVID. And you just want to say, there's a pandemic going on, what do you want me to do? You know, I can't hurry up the post, got nothing to do with the product. But
it's always remarkable how
and
how those 2 things can help you forget about the 780 positive reviews you've had.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. Real trick.
It's frustrating.
Do you find then that I mean, it sounds as though you enjoy the stitching as much as the designing. So is that's still something, is it an active pastime for you, doing stitching and stuff like that?
Daily.
Yeah. And an important therapeutic practice, would you say?
Totally. Totally. I have an aunt, and a few years ago, she had a bad experience with a relationship, and she asked me if she could do some stitching, and she's still doing it now.
Yeah.
She's still doing it, and she said it helped me through it because it really makes you forget. It is so therapeutic, and I think there's a power in it that very few people realize until they actually start.
Mm.
It is when you're stressed or when you're down or whatever, you can just forget about it and you're doing something. You are really sort of actively working on something, and it's wonderful.
It's such a bizarre thing. It's really hard to elaborate. Is that the right word? It's really hard to explain that to people who've never done it. What a sort of deep feeling you can get from something which on the face of it seems just like a sort of, you know, just a needlework or whatever, isn't it? But I mean, I realized that like when you meditate, if your mind drifts, you're supposed to bring your mind back, like focus your attention back in the present moment. And when you're doing needlework, and particularly with, you know, even more so with tapestry, because it's just one stitch, you know, but every time you're pulling the thread out or putting the thread back in, you're bringing yourself back to attention. And so it's like super meditative. It's like quite remarkable. I feel like it should be prescribed.
Absolutely. If they could mark it down into pill form, that would be amazing. You know, that would be help an awful lot of people out.
When I did an interview with Melorize a while ago, she's based in Spain, and she was talking about how out there the market for like new thinking in designs within sort of needlepoint and cross stitch and stuff just isn't there. You know, we know that like America's forward thinking, if you like, the UK's forward thinking, you know, and as you said, the countries that you listed are very much the countries that I see as my blog visitors and all those sorts of things. And then Europe has these patches of like very strong tradition that it's quite hard to kind of get through. I mean, is there a strong tradition in Belgium of tapestry and that sort of thing? Yeah.
No, it's cross stitch.
Right.
It is cross stitch mainly. Very few people do tapestry, which is bizarre because it resembles Flemish tapestries. So you would have thought that, you know, there would have been that link there or that tradition, but I think especially Belgium, it is mainly tapestry, mainly cross stitch.
And then now you're in Hong Kong, right?
Yeah.
Is there much of a needlework tradition? I mean, that's a weird thing to say, isn't it? Because Hong Kong's an unusual place, I guess. I mean,
there is for the expat community.
Right.
There are a few companies here who offer tutorials or sort of needlework sessions. There is a lady in Central who trained at the Royal School of Needlework, Chinese lady, and she has got a very successful business teaching people, and that is intricate embroidery. It's not just cross stitch, but it is all sorts, you know, French knots, bouillon knots, you name it. Anything that you want, she can teach you, and she does a lot of classes. But these are some very rare pockets. Hong Kong people, incredibly busy people. They work at least 12 hours a day. There's very little time for this kind of thing. Also, it's unbelievably hot here. It's not conducive to wanting to do a needlepoint cushion.
You've never been tempted to like start teaching it, stick your finger out, see if
I have done a few. No, I have done a few sessions with those companies. Yeah, I have done a few of them. But I have I work freelance for other companies as well, so there is the time restriction. The freelance work has got nothing to do with the needlepoint, but there's a time restriction. I can't do a regular slot of teaching.
So let's talk about, if we may, let's talk about like your design process then. How does it go from like an idea in your head to a fully formed product? Presumably you've got a routine to this now? Like, do you sketch it out? Do you just create straight into the software?
No, I never do that. I never create straight onto the software. I always have to try out the colors. I don't know if I should say this, Jamie, but I'm slightly colorblind as well. And that's an unusual
that's
one.
even more impressive then in that case, because your color choices have been fairly on point. So well done.
So I really want to see the effect of the thread on the canvas, especially because I do a lot of blending. So all my stitches, they include 2 threads of crewel wool per stitch, and in a lot of cases I will do 2 different colors, and I want to see that effect. So in a lot of cases I will do some strips of colors, see what works well, and sort of go down the sort of gradient, if
Hmm.
you want, and see if it works, and then see what flower I could adapt that to.
Oh,
But
right. So
it's
it's
usually
like,
colors that's, yeah, it's
so like
usually
the,
colors I really like, and I kind of start playing with it and see what I could possibly work out from there. Because that's what I did with the black rose, for
right.
example. I
Hmm.
love grays, I love black, so I did a strip of colors here on the side in all those type of sorry, can you see it, in all
Hmm.
those type of shades. um, and then I sort of looked online to see what pictures of black roses there were, and um, I picked one and I started that. That's what I use as a base.
That's interesting. That's quite a different approach. I wouldn't necessarily, you know, a lot of the time you would think it would be like the form's the thing. You go, I want to do this particular object, and then maybe you work through the colors or whatever, but you take it purely from a color first, see where we go. Do you find,
Sometimes I do, but sometimes you see something you see an image of something, a picture that I took, and that has got particular colors on it, so you can
hmm,
work from that as well. So if the shape of if there is movement in a flower, for example, I really like that when there's sort of I'll give you an example. This really was something that stood out to me. That's my latest one. I don't
right?
know if you can see it.
Yeah,
So it's a poppy, and it's the movement of this leaf, this petal that I loved. I
right.
thought that was incredible. And it's obviously you can't do anything else but red for this, so you
Hmm.
need to go for shades of red. But it's the image that really kind of worked for me.
I like it as well because it's quite like, I was going to say atypical. Everyone normally does a poppy, like a remembrance poppy and all those sorts of things. Yours has got a bit more of even a story going on in the first place, really.
Mm. It's sort of there's a bit more movement, there's a bit more dynamic in it than.
Do you find, like, because obviously there's a lot of organic content that you produce. So, do you think that you might move in other directions, or are you like, there's plenty of the natural world to be going on with? Thanks very much.
That's a tough one. I mean, I've done vegetables as well. I've done fruit. I've done a crown. I'm not sure if you've seen that, and which is based on the imperial state crown. I'm not sure. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all trying to make a living as well, and I
Mm,
think we need to go for the images that people expect,
yeah.
that I think people would like to have in their home, and
Hmm.
that people would like to buy and make. And to me, these are the main things, because we want to sell it. We need to make a living. So I think you're quite restricted. I mean, it'd be very nice to do a pair of sunglasses and do a tapestry cushion in a pair of with a pair of sunglasses on there. But how would that work? I don't know.
You might have to have an alternate brand, almost like some kind of
Yeah,
skunk works, where it's like, because
yeah,
obviously Flanders Tapestry Collection, people have got expectations, like you say. There's
yeah,
the brand and the marquee. Is that the right word? What people
yeah,
would expect. I guess, yeah, you'd have to have a sort of counterculture thing going
yeah,
on. But I
yeah.
mean, it feels as though you're quite at ease with that. Like, this feels like you're creating the stuff that you like, and it's a nice fit within the brand that you've built and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Because your
I
brand is
think.
quite classy, isn't it?
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
Speaking of someone who's got
I
absolutely
try.
zero class as well, that's kind
That's not at all. I think
of...
it's, well, yours is fun. It's all about having fun and having, doing something different with a skill that you have. I think it's brilliant. I love it. I think it's incredibly refreshing, and that's what the market needs as well. To, like I said, to lift the profile of it.
Hmm.
Um, Mine is more traditional because I think that's just what I like myself as well.
Hmm.
Um, not overly traditional, but as we discussed before, that kind of cross section
So,
of going slightly away from the real traditional stuff and moving more towards something a bit more modern without being too wacky.
yeah, it's for this generation stately homeowner, isn't it? That sort of thing. It's like for the people who've got
It
like,
may be, yeah.
but and that's not even a slight. Do you know what I mean? Like your
Yeah,
stuff, yours are the kind of cushions you would have in your lounge, and you'd be like, look at these, fine things. They're kind of
yeah.
like they fit in with that. I mean, to be honest,
Thank
most
you.
of the the tapestry cushion kits that I've got in a pile down here that I don't get any chance to do, sort of thing, are with that in mind. They're like statement pieces. And it was something you said before, isn't it, that you might have a house filled with IKEA, but you want those handmade standout pieces to be able to do it. And I think yours definitely fit within that aesthetic, and are also quite a nice balance against perhaps some of the more contemporary looking stuff. You can have a few of them together, it would make a nice mix.
Thank you.
In terms of like marketing and stuff like that, then obviously you've got your, you know, where your customers are. Do you use particular social media platforms, or are you kicking it old school with email lists, or what's your like preferred methods of reaching out to your customers?
Well, I think, you know, you can't, when you run a business these days, you have to have a presence on Facebook and Instagram. My preferred, because of my captive audience being slightly more my age, I think Facebook is possibly better. I think Instagram is much younger, although I think, you know, people are now moving towards that. There is definitely a shift. But yeah, Facebook and Instagram, those two definitely. I also have a mailing list. I communicate with my customers, my existing customers, quite often. I think the one-to-one, if you know, no matter what platform you use, you have to make sure that it is a personal, almost a personal experience, because this is quite a personal choice. To buy a tapestry kit, a particular design, and so on and so on. And I try to communicate with my customers as much as I can, whether it is via newsletters or mailing lists, or, you know, Facebook. So I don't really have a preferred method. I would personally, if there was something like this, a Zoom with all my customers, I would prefer that, because face to face is still the best way. Unfortunately, you can't reach as many people that way.
I sometimes find myself that I am quite time poor, but when it comes to like doing customer service emails, which is something like I always struggle, because part of me thinks I need to be doing bigger creative things that will bring in income over the long term, and the customer servicing is an extremely important element, but it always is like, that's reactive rather than creative, if that makes sense. And so sometimes you can just have emails from people, and you find sometimes I have to go, this person is, you know, I'm grateful for this person, and sometimes like challenge, not to see it as a task, but to remind myself that these are people who've taken the time to spend with me, and I owe them everything. And it's almost like you have to stop and take a breath and like find the love, and remember that the love is the thing, so that then you can respond to them.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's one of the things that we, you know, that's one of the first things we should react to, you know, emails like that, and we don't. And it's like you said, you have to remind yourself, you know, these are the people who actually support my work, and, you know, they are important people. But yeah, sometimes you forget. I'm the same like you. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
I always love as well. I've probably got maybe like 6 or 7 random customers who come to me at different times, but with fair frequency, because maybe they have a technology problem that keeps recurring, or some of them just like to have random every 3-month conversations with me or whatever. And they're always quite nice, because I don't know whether it would be the same with you, but mine's quite a solitary experience, you know, working from home, working on my own projects. I have people that help me, but it's very much me, myself, and my dog a lot of the time. So then it's almost like you get these people who come to you quite often, and they're almost like co-workers that work in a different department within the same building in your mind or something, isn't it? It's like, hi Nancy, how are you?
You just want to make yourself a cup of tea and have a chat, really. That's how I feel sometimes. It's lovely.
And you do. I also quite enjoy, because there's a couple of people who email me on a semi-regular basis, and their lives are so different from mine, because I think mine is very much like, half the time I'm a dad, half the time I'm flying by the seat of my pants trying to run a business, and theirs are so very different. And I quite like sometimes looking at where they are on the map and just zooming back out and just being a bit like, blimey, you know, you live like 9,000 miles from me, and here we are having a chin wag for the 3rd time or whatever. It always still blows my mind, just being able to reach out, and just and the fact that we can do that just from our own spaces, you know, and end up with these meaningful connections.
Absolutely.
Do you do anything like batching your time, or any of those? Do you have any productivity tips?
What do you mean by batching your time?
Batching your time. So if you've got a certain job to do or a certain series of jobs to do, you sit down and you go, right, for the next 2 hours I am email guy, or for the next 2 hours I am scheduling things on Instagram person, because then you get in that mode and you can just bang them out with a bit more frequency rather than doing this bit and this bit and this bit and this bit and going back and forwards.
I do that a lot, and the one thing I don't do is account, and then that piles up and I've got 2 days of it. Yeah, but you're right that I think once you're in the frame of mind, I have to divide my time, because I'm not just the Flanders Tapestry Collection, I'm also doing, as I said, freelance design work for other companies, and so it is sort of juggling it a little bit sometimes. But
what sort of design is that? Sorry to interrupt, but is that similar?
I work freelance for a company in the UK who supplies the heritage gift market.
Right.
So the tourist industry, and I design and, well, not necessarily design, but do product development and come up with ideas and concepts. Okay. And so it's a very creative kind of work, which has been I've been working with this particular company for the last 5 months now.
Right.
And it's very full on. So sometimes it's really nice to have a day where I just think Flanders Tapestry Collection, and I just do my thing with that. I can play around with packaging. I've been playing around today with new packaging I'm going to have printed, and that's great, because that's for me. You know, that's my baby I'm looking after at the time. So that's very therapeutic, that you can work on something that really is yours. Nobody else has got any say over it.
Yeah, how do you balance the tension? Because, you know, I've done work for other people before, and you get that thing, and I don't think clients necessarily realize it, but where they keep coming back to you, oh, can you tweak this thing? Can you tweak this thing? And all those sorts of things. How do you, when you're in charge, you tweak things as much as you like or whatever, but I mean, are you at ease with being a designer for someone else? Are you happy to accept the criticism and, you know, roll with the changes and those sorts of things? Or do you still kind of struggle with that?
No, I'm okay with that. I'm okay if it's constructive criticism. Absolutely, I think we all need that. And I think sometimes that's something that I don't get enough of the Flanders Tapestry Collection, because you know, sometimes criticism, you have to get it, you have to take it on board. What I find is that with the Flanders Tapestry Collection, because I put so much time into it, that people are scared to criticize because they think I might take it personally. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that's where I was wondering in some ways, because if you've got other people who you're working for, you can start to sort of doubt yourself, but actually in a way that keeps you on your toes, I guess. And you can, there is a sense you can get a bit complacent as well, can't you? Being your own boss and going, oh, every idea I have is marvelous.
Yeah, exactly. And aren't I great? Because everybody says I am, because they don't dare to be brutally honest.
Do you have a sort of a trusted set of people that you can bounce ideas off of in terms of Flanders?
Usually my husband, he will tell me like it is.
Yeah, you gotta
which
have
is great,
those, right?
you know, and then that's what works. And you know, I trust him 100%, because he will just say, no, that's not right, you need to redo this or redo that. And I get grumpy about it sometimes, but I do take it on board.
Yeah, I have to thank my wife for being my head of quality assurance and brevity in her feedback. Sometimes you're like, that's fine. No, it's fine. Well.
But I mean, going back to what you were asking before about working for somebody else and how to balance that, I kind of, which is one of the reasons why I want to work freelance. I'm lucky enough that I can sort of pick some of the projects that I want to work on, and that's a great way of really keeping these the motivation going, because the projects that I'm working on are great fun, and it makes the time go by very quickly. And it's you know, I feel very much, even when I'm working for somebody else, I feel very much in charge of it.
Yeah,
because I am working freelance. So that's a great way of, I find that balance works for me.
You sound like you're in a pretty sort of fortunate position. Like, it's nice to have that freelance bit that isn't a sort of strain as well, or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a company, because I was looking for a company to work for a while, but this is somebody that I've known for a long time, and we work together, and you know, we can be brutally honest to each other about, you know, what we think about designs and so on, or about each other's ideas. I think honesty, when you are designing, is so incredibly important, because you know, and if you can work with a team of people that can be honest, then that's a great advantage.
I
It makes
sometimes,
life a lot easier.
yeah, I sometimes struggle with that from an XStitch standpoint, where designers will come to me because there's a difference. Like, you know, you can submit a design to me and it's on point. I don't really have to give it any thought whatsoever because you've got a lot of experience of what the real world market wants, as opposed to perhaps what online markets want. And so sometimes I'll work with designers that I found on Etsy who've got great attitude, and, you know, they've got a fresh approach and stuff, but trying to fit the standards that you would expect from a magazine or you would expect to sell wholesale to a market is slightly different. And I sometimes struggle with finding the right ways to give feedback to people because I don't want to be too prescriptive. I don't want to sound like I'm patronizing, and I don't want to sound like I know everything or like I've got all the ideas, but at the same point I've got a fairly good perspective. And it's quite like finding the honesty is a really difficult thing to do. I had to do it quite recently, and I did have to talk with Mary and kind of go, you know, I'm not quite sure what to do, how to couch these things and stuff. But actually, in the end, just being straightforward and honest might be a bit uncomfortable, but I feel like you maintain an integrity. And actually, if people can get over the ego blow in the first place of receiving some feedback that's critical, they can then get past that, and it can start to be quite a healthy sort of conversation that you can have.
Totally. And I think also the thing to bear in mind is that it is your magazine. It's got your name on it, and, you know, when you give feedback, I think you can be honest, and people just have to accept it because you have got you've got a bigger picture in mind, and you know what it is that you want. I you know, if you were to turn around to me and say, actually, I don't like that colorway, can you do it? Yeah, fine. You know, it's your magazine, and people have to accept that.
But I think part of that is, though, that you're used to that kind of feedback and not, you know, it took me a long time when I was doing other work for other people to not take it personally. The more feedback you receive, the less you take it as a savage blow to your creative spirit or whatever, don't you?
Yeah.
Whereas the first few times you're like, how dare you?
Yes.
It's like difficult to
it can be hard. I'm not saying that I don't find it hard, because sometimes it can hurt. Because I think sometimes you put so much into something and you think it's absolutely brilliant, and, you know, it's better than sliced bread or whatever they say in English. But it can be quite tough to take it on board if you've put an awful lot of energy into it and an awful lot of thought into it. But I think ultimately, you know, when you work freelance, or when you supply work for somebody else, they're paying for you. You have to, you know, kind of accept it.
How do you explain to people what you do for a living? Do people get it, or do people stare blankly at you when you try and explain it?
I usually, you know, I say I usually say I'm in textiles. If they then want to know more, then I will explain.
If they blink and you're like,
if they blink, then I'll explain it. I don't. It depends on who you're talking to, I think. If you're talking to a 22, 23-year-old, it's not gonna, you know, it's not gonna register that you do tapestry, or that's gonna be a really bizarre thing. I don't know. It really depends on who you're talking to.
Do you ever get the thing, you know, I'm Mr. XStitch, I'm the kingpin, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, I've used my unorthodoxy, is that a word? To my advantage, I guess, by going, I'm a man that does needlework. Have you had to go through much of that process in terms of being a man in a traditionally considered female industry, pastime, etc.?
Yeah, I think, you know, coming from Europe, that's not that big a deal.
Right.
If you come over here, you know, a few months ago, I had somebody here, family of my husband's, or friends of my husband's, and they came around and they said, well, what is that? I said, oh, you know, that's what I do. The stitching tapestry, that's for women. And there's still that, you know, over here, there is still that sort of reaction, if you want. And it feels quite alien. But I tend to laugh it off. It's you know, it's what you like to do, isn't it?
Yeah, I was just trying to think about what you were saying before about like your core markets and my core markets and the countries that we sell to. and how you were saying if you're in Europe, it wouldn't be too much of an issue. And you wonder whether there's a sort of parallel in that the stories that you're told about needlework, like if you like westernized countries, US, Canada, all those sorts of things, have been told the stories of marketing and the American dream and buy this, you know, piece of technology and all those sorts of things. They're also sold on the gender narrative, aren't they? The same way as like they had to decide that Nintendo, because I think, I don't know whether you knew this, when they first invented Nintendo, it was like an appliance and it wasn't really selling very well. So they decided they had to rebrand it as a toy in order for it to sell more. And when they did that at the time, back in the 80s, they had to make a decision whether it was a toy for boys or a toy for girls. And so they went, it's a toy for boys. And, you know, that's where we end up with misogyny in video games and all that sort of stuff, just from a simple decision like that. But because there's so much like gender polarity on what girls like and what boys like and all those sorts of things, actually the more a country is embedded in that sort of narrative, the marketing storyline, the harder it is for people to comprehend that a person can stand against that gender bias and do their own thing.
Yeah, and I think that's totally. But I think what is happening now, and maybe we're lucky with that, is that times are changing, and there is much more of a fluidity now.
Yeah.
In the West, you know, there are countries that are still very behind on that level. So I think, you know, as it comes to raised eyebrows for stitching for a man, that has disappeared. I think there is that fluidity now where it doesn't really, there is no longer those gender roles, those defined gender roles anymore, especially in the UK and in Europe, maybe the States, you know, in
time, once they've gotten over it. Yeah.
So I think that's no longer that much of an issue in those countries. I think there are still an awful lot of countries where it is an issue.
Yeah, I guess that's true. And it's just, again, it's another funny thing to just have been involved in something where the gender storyline's strong, and so therefore it has quite an impact. You know, I was on national telly last week, and that was, you know, largely based about, oh, men are getting into sewing and what a novelty it is and stuff. And it's like, you know, I've been running the Mr. XStitch site for 12 years now. It doesn't feel like a novelty to me, but for so many people, it still is. And I think that, at least, like you say, the tides are changing and there is a lot less sort of polarity than there was. Still quite a way to go, though, I think.
Still quite a way to go, but I think also the fact that it is still a novelty for some people is a good thing, because we are reaching new people that way, and we're actually able to, I wouldn't want to say re-educate them, but, you know, make it more the norm. And I think, you know, just us here, the two guys sitting here talking about cross stitch and needlepoint, 20 years ago that probably wouldn't have happened.
Or we would have not done it and then published it online, that's for sure. We would have done it in a quiet corner
exactly.
somewhere. Yeah,
but that's exactly it, you know, that's exactly it. And I think that you know, that's still an awful lot, a long way to go. But I don't know, I think it's going in the right direction as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I think the pandemic and stuff forcing people to try, or encouraging people to try handmade, means there are more people taking chances and stuff like that. And I think and I've reflected before as well, I think that now the accessibility to content that befits a person's personality is a lot greater than it was back in the day. You know, when you and I both started out, it was quite hard. If you wanted to find something that was manly, it had to be a wolf or a racing car or a fighter plane or something. And it's like, at least there's a lot more now. So there's never been as good a time as there is now. I hear there's also a really remarkable cross-stitch magazine out there somewhere that you can get online. But yeah, you know, I think, I remain quite optimistic about all of that. I thought I only really have one more question in the sort of formal context of this, which is kind of like what your top tip would be for someone who is perhaps an aspiring cross-stitch designer / tapestry designer, or someone who's just starting out. What were the things you wish someone had told you when you were starting out, perhaps? Or what's your top tips?
My goodness. Start earlier, to start as soon as it pops up in your head. Just start stitching. Try it out, you know, work with colors, play with colors. I should have done it a lot earlier, a lot sooner. It's not difficult. It's not rocket science. It's incredibly enjoyable, you know, and it is really taking that step to just buy some wool and start trying things out on a piece of canvas. And mess around with it and see what you come up with. That's all. Just start. Don't think about it. Start.
Seems pretty sound advice to me, that one. Do you think there's any merit in learning about color theory and all that, or do you think it's better to not even let that stop you? Just really,
In what? Sorry.
Like, you know, like color theory and, you know, how colors work together and all those sorts of things, or do you think that's sort of your next level once you've just get on in there and play around?
I know nothing about that at all, and you just play with it. I think you have fun with it. You have fun with colors. It's like picking up coloring pencils and starting to draw. It's exactly the same thing. You just create something, and you know, if you like it, brilliant. I'm sure if you like it, if you like it, then other people will as well. And that's,
Yeah,
it's not art. It's just it's fun. And if you can share, if you can share or turn into a product something that you really enjoy and people buy it, that really gives you a feel-good factor. That's brilliant. There's nothing like, you know, hearing my phone and there's a ka-ching from Shopify or from Etsy because there's somebody who's interested in what I've done, and it's brilliant. It's a fantastic feeling.
That's cool. That's a good one. Do you have any questions? I feel like I've pretty much gone through everything that was in my mind to ask you. Do you have anything you'd like to add? Is there anything I should have asked you?
No, I think it's been a really sort of good way conversation. It didn't actually feel like an interview. It felt like a chat, to be honest.
That's what we like.
That's brilliant.
That's how
That's
we like
brilliant.
it. Well, thank you for your time. Oh, tell people where they can find you online. And obviously you've got let me get this right, Ray. Obviously you've got a YouTube channel.
I have a YouTube channel.
There, somewhere.
Yeah.
Where else can people find you?
People can find me on my website, which is www.flanderstapestrycollection.com, and I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, and if you go onto my website, there's links to Facebook and to Instagram, and I'm sure that details will be in the information below as well.
Would I be right in thinking as well that if people sign up to your mailing list, that's a smart move? Because I know that a lot of the time you have some pretty tasty deals that pop up.
Yes, I have some very good deals most of the time. So if you go onto my website, there is an option there to join the mailing list.
Brilliant.
And you know, just put your name down and you'll get informed. I usually send a letter out every month, so we'll keep you informed on fantastic deals that are going on. Or on new designs.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you for your time.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure talking to you.
And we'll have another session at some point. I'll record another session with you in 5 years' time. We'll be like, look how well we've all done.
I hope so, mate.
That'd be great. Thank you. So there you have it. That was a great conversation with Johan. I'd like to thank him for taking the time to chat with me on the Discourse. I thought it was fascinating. It was great to hear about his family history. I love the way he just managed to go and get himself a job at Liberty all of a sudden, you know. But he's clearly a classy guy. He's got a great design sensibility. I thought it was fascinating the way that he makes a lot of his design decisions based purely on the colour first, which was quite unexpected. And yeah, hopefully you found it interesting. Please do like the video if you liked it, and if you've got any comments, by all means leave them in the section below. I will be doing another season of Discourses later in the year, so if you've got any designers you'd like me to talk to, please again let me know in the comments. And if you've got any questions, if you're an aspiring cross-stitch designer and you would like to find out more, or there's anything you'd like me to ask other designers, just again let me know. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care, everybody.